Sailing around the world on a beautiful boat might seem like a privilege, or a privileged life rather, to many, but the reality was more of a nightmare for Suzanne Heywood. Before we talk to her, let's take a look at her story.
Before my parents announced I was going to be sailing around the world, I was a little girl living in England. And when I was 6 years old, my father suddenly announced that he wanted to sail around the world. I was both excited and sad, because I was going on my dad's big adventure, and that was exciting. On the other hand, I was going to leave behind my doll's house, all my friends. Yeah, I was going to leave behind school. I was going to leave behind my precious dog, Rusty. So it was a mixed emotion. Wavewalker was quite a big boat, but all I had was one bunk on the boat, one bunk and one drawer. We only had one table, and most of the time we only had one working toilet. The other thing that I realized is food on board a boat when you're at sea for weeks on end becomes very scarce. So we ended up living on canned food, tinned biscuits. I was expected to work down below, cooking and cleaning for these paying crew that we had on board. What I really wanted to do was to help on deck, but my father had only bought one set of safety equipment for a child, which he believed should belong to my brother because he was the boy. So the voyage was supposed to be 3 years, and I voted to come home, and my brother voted to come home, but my father overruled us, and my father said, no, it wasn't a democracy, it was a dictatorship, and we were going to keep sailing, and we did.
Wow, to tell us more about her remarkable story, please welcome to the show, Suzanne Heywood.
Hi, lovely to be here.
Wow. I mean, thank you. Thank you so much, Suzanne, for being here. So many questions to ask you. First one, your father's original voyage took 4 years instead of 3. Can you tell us why?
Well, we were very badly shipwrecked in the Indian Ocean. So we were crossing from South Africa to Australia, and my father had chosen a route which was incredibly dangerous because he wanted to follow Captain Cook around the world. And halfway across that ocean, the southern Indian Ocean, we were hit by an enormous wave. I was thrown against the roof of the cabin, against the wall of the cabin, fractured my skull, broke my nose, ended up having multiple head operations without anesthetic on a tiny atoll in the middle of the Indian Ocean. So that's why we were a year late by the time we got to Hawaii, which should have been the end point of our voyage.
Oh my gosh.
Unbelievable. So after the first 4 years, your father decided to keep sailing for a decade, despite you and your brother wanting to return home. So when did you first fight for your parents to let you get an education?
Well, at the end of that 4 years, I voted to come home because I wanted an education. I wanted to come back. I wanted to see my friends. I wanted to see my dog again, my doll's house. But my father insisted on keeping sailing. And for a while, there was very little I could do about it. I mean, you're trapped on a boat. All you've got is a few books. You can't do very much if your parents are not minded to give you any sort of education. I then managed to go to school for a short while in Australia, and then after that I convinced my parents, and by this point I'm like 13 years old, so we've been at sea now for 7 years, 7 years. I managed to convince them to let me start studying by correspondence, and I become absolutely determined that I'm going to educate myself off that boat. But I have to do that in almost no space, whilst catering for all these paying crew, with almost no kind of privacy or time to do it in.
Oh, my word. All right, let me ask you this. Your parents eventually let your brother go to school in New Zealand, and the two of you were left to live alone there for 10 months when you were only 16. So tell us a little bit, or just paint a picture of what your day-to-day looked like.
Well, I was still trying to teach myself by correspondence, by post, while my brother was going to school, and I'd been left to look after him while my parents sailed away. So I was supposed to be cooking and cleaning and doing everything that, normally a parent would do. But I was basically spending most of my days on my own. And eventually, halfway through this year, I rang up Youthline or Childline. It was called Youthline in New Zealand, Childline here in the UK. And I spoke to this counsellor and said, I need your help. I mean, I just can't cope. I can't cope being a 16-year-old, being left by myself. I don't know where my parents are. I don't know when they're going to come back.
This is insane.
I don't even have a visa that's going to last for the time that I'm here because, of course, the New Zealand authorities didn't want me to stay because I was a British kid with no parents.
Wow.
Suzanne, there's this silly show I watch on HBO called Surviving the Raft. You should go on there and crush it.
Yeah.
Just a little tip. All right, so yeah,
I think I could.
I think you would. Yeah. So you eventually went to Oxford, but you were so isolated on that boat for so long. What was it like when you were put into that social setting at school?
Well, I got into university, and it's quite a tale of how I managed to get in. I was really lucky, but I was also incredibly determined. So I turned up, and they gave me an offer to come. I mean, it's all kind of explained in the story. What I found when I got there was socially it was incredibly difficult. I mean, actually, academically, it was okay. I'd worked out how to teach myself, but socially it was really difficult, and it took quite a few months before I really started to build my social skills and started to make friends. I had by the time I finished a university, but it did take a while because I lived on my own, very isolated for so long.
Wow. All right, you're being a little modest because you went on to earn your PhD.
I know.
Could you ever imagine being on that boat that you know, growing up, that you would turn out the way you did?
No, and I do think I'm incredibly lucky because I've now been in touch since my book came out. I've been in touch with lots of other kids who've had similar experiences. Some of them have had a great experience, but sadly there are others who've also felt very trapped on a boat without being able to get hold of education. And many of them have not had the chances that I've had. I was able to go to university. I was able to do a PhD. I've been able to create a career. I've now got kids of my own. And I just feel now's the time when I can tell the story and hopefully get people to start having a debate about the right of parents and the right of kids, and where do those rights have to have some sort of meeting point.
Beautifully stated. I have your book right here, and it's fascinating. Speaking of your kids, though, you do have children of your own. So my question is, how has the way that you were raised affected you now as a parent?
Well, I tried to be the sort of parent to my kids that I didn't have. You'll find in the book, my parents were not very parental, not very caring towards me as a child. But I did have some crew members who came on the boat who were caring, and I formed really strong relationships with them. So I tried to emulate some of what I'd seen there with my children. Although my children will tell you that I'm still not very sympathetic when they have small injuries. You know, if they cut their finger, I tend to say, well, you should try having your kind of head fractured in the middle of the Indian Ocean. I'm really not going to worry about that.
She wins.
That's the bar now.
Yeah, she wins every time.
No wonder you got like Bear Grylls and everybody loving your book. It makes a lot of sense. Suzanne, thank you so much for joining us today. Wow. DBL Nation, to learn even more about Suzanne's story, pick up a copy of Wavewalker, a memoir of breaking free, wherever books are sold. Thank you again, Suzanne.